Have you ever felt alone, even when you're surrounded by people? As if no one really sees you, like you're physically present, but emotionally distant from everything and everyone? It's a strange feeling, almost hard to explain. Because it's not just being alone. It's something deeper. It's like there's a quiet emptiness inside you that no conversation, no company, and no distraction can fully fill. And maybe the most confusing part is that you can't always understand why. You might have friends, family, people around you, and still feel like something is missing. As if there's an invisible barrier between you and the rest of the world. Like no one can truly access who you really are, or worse, like you don't even know who you are anymore. And that starts to raise an uncomfortable question. Is something wrong with me? Because at some point, you begin to compare yourself. You see other people connecting so easily, building bonds, feeling like they belong, while you're watching from the outside, trying to understand why it seems so natural for them, and so difficult for you. But what if I told you that this feeling isn't a flaw? What if, instead, it's a signal? According to Carl Jung, who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens. And maybe what you're feeling isn't just loneliness, but the beginning of an inner awakening that very few people have the courage to face. Because most people spend their entire lives avoiding this emptiness. They distract themselves, stay busy, fill their lives with stimulation, superficial relationships, external validation, anything to keep that inner silence from surfacing. But you're feeling it. And feeling this requires a different kind of awareness. It's not comfortable. It's not light. But it's also not common. Because there's something inside you that doesn't settle for shallow connections. Something that perceives more, feels more, seeks something deeper, even if that costs you moments of isolation, misunderstanding, and even self-doubt. And maybe that's exactly why you feel out of place. Like you're living in a world where interactions are too fast, too shallow, too automatic, while you're searching for meaning, depth, truth. And that creates a silent conflict. On the outside, you try to fit in. You try to participate. You try to adapt. But inside, there's a constant sense of not belonging. Like no matter how hard you try, it never truly feels like your place. And the most curious part is that, often, you don't even show it. You learn to smile, to talk, to keep everything seemingly normal, while internally, there's a distance no one notices. And that's when loneliness becomes more intense. Not when you're alone, but when you're with others, and still feel invisible. But there's something almost no one explains to you. This feeling doesn't come out of nowhere. It has an origin. It has a pattern. It follows a psychological logic that, once you start to understand it, completely changes how you see yourself and your relationships. Because maybe you're not alone due to a lack of people. Maybe you're alone because, at some level, you learn to disconnect from yourself in order to be accepted by others. And if that's true, then your loneliness isn't just about the outside world. It's about something that started within you, and keeps repeating, even without you realizing it. And when you begin to notice that, something shifts. Because it stops being just a confusing feeling, and starts becoming awareness. The kind that's uncomfortable, but at the same time freeing. Because deep down, there's a part of you that always knew there was something more behind this loneliness. And that's exactly what we're going to dive into here. But before we continue, I want to invite you to do something simple, but important. If at any point in this video you feel like this is speaking directly to you, leave a like. Not just to support the content, but as a signal, to yourself, that you're ready to look at this more clearly. Small actions like this help this kind of message reach other people who are also feeling this way, in silence. And I really want to hear from you. Comment below, have you ever felt alone even when you're not? It can just be a yes, or, if you want, write a word that represents how you feel: emptiness, disconnection, not belonging, anything that captures it. Sometimes putting it into words is already the beginning of change. And if you want to understand yourself better, your emotional patterns, this feeling of being different, of feeling more, perceiving more, then subscribe to the channel. Because here, we don't just talk about what you feel, we show you why. And in the next part, you'll start to realize that this loneliness didn't come out of nowhere, it follows a pattern, and understanding that pattern might be the first step to changing everything. There's a big difference between being alone and feeling alone. And that difference completely changes how you understand everything happening inside you right now. Because being alone is often a choice. A moment of silence, rest, reconnection. But feeling alone is something else. It's a feeling that invades, that lingers, that shows up even when you don't want it to. It's like something inside you is disconnected, not just from people, but from the experience of being alive itself. And the most interesting part is that this feeling doesn't appear out of nowhere. It starts subtly, almost imperceptibly. Maybe back then, in moments when you tried to express yourself and weren't understood. When you showed who you really were, and it wasn't well received. When you felt like you had to adapt, reshape yourself, adjust to fit into a place where, deep down, you never truly belonged. And little by little, without realizing it, you started doing something many people do to survive emotionally: you began to drift away from yourself. Not consciously, but through small internal decisions. You stopped saying certain things. You began filtering what you felt. You started showing only the acceptable parts of yourself. And layer by layer, you built a version of yourself that works better socially, but doesn't fully represent who you are. And this is where it all begins. Because when you disconnect from parts of yourself, you might still connect with the world, but never fully. Carl Jung spoke about the persona, the social mask we all wear to be accepted. And it's not the problem. The problem arises when you start believing that this mask is all that you are. Because the more you live through this adapted version, the further you drift from your essence. And that creates a void. A void that's hard to explain, because on the outside, everything seems to work. People interact with you, talk to you, spend time with you, but inside, there's a constant feeling that no one truly knows you. And maybe the most impactful realization is this: in many cases, that's true. Because how could someone truly know you, if you've learned to hide parts of yourself just to be accepted? And this isn't your fault. It's emotional adaptation. It's the result of experiences where being yourself didn't feel safe, or didn't feel like enough. So you learn to observe more, speak less, feel more, hide more. And over time, it became a pattern. You become someone who perceives a lot, understands a lot, feels deeply, but expresses little. Someone who connects externally, but remains internally guarded. And that creates a very specific kind of loneliness. It's not the loneliness of absence, it's the loneliness of invisibility. It's being with people, and feeling like no one is truly with you. It's talking, and feeling like no one is accessing what's most real inside you. It's living, but with a constant sense that something is missing. And the most challenging part is that you start getting used to it. You start normalizing this feeling. Telling yourself this is just how it is, that everyone is a little alone, that you can't be 100% with anyone. But deep down, there's a part of you that doesn't accept that. A part that knows there's more. That desires deeper, more real, more authentic connections. And that part is the one that suffers the most. Because it can feel the difference between what is superficial and what could be deep. It recognizes when something is empty, even if it looks normal to everyone else. And that creates even more distance. Because while the world seems comfortable with the surface, you start to feel out of place for needing something more. And that's when many people begin to question themselves. Am I too demanding? Do I expect too much from people? Am I the problem? But maybe that's not the right question. Maybe the real question is, how much of yourself have you held back, just to belong? Because the truth is, there's no real connection without real exposure. And as long as you keep protecting yourself from being fully seen, you're also preventing yourself from being truly connected. And that doesn't mean opening up to just anyone. It means recognizing that your loneliness isn't only about others not understanding you. It's also about you not yet allowing yourself to be seen. And when you begin to see that, something changes. You start to realize that loneliness isn't just a state, it's a consequence. A consequence of emotional patterns, defense mechanisms, unconscious choices that were made to protect you, but are now keeping you away from what you want most. And that can be deeply uncomfortable. Because now it's no longer about blaming the environment, people, or circumstances. Now a different kind of responsibility begins to emerge, more internal, more profound. And along with it, a question you may have never asked yourself with complete honesty. If someone could see everything you truly feel, without filters, without adjustments, without masks, would you allow it, or would you still try to hide? If this resonated with you, comment one word, truth. Not just as an answer, but as a quiet acknowledgement that, at some level, you've started to see yourself differently now. Have you noticed how the loneliness you feel isn't exactly about being alone, but about not feeling seen, even when you're surrounded by people? Like there's an invisible distance between you and the rest of the world, a constant sense of disconnection you can't explain, but also can't ignore. And this is where the real conflict begins. Because on one hand, you try to adapt. You try to fit in, adjust, seem normal. But on the other, there's something inside you that resists. Something that observes, that perceives beyond the surface, that feels more deeply, and because of that, ends up isolating even more. Carl Jung said that loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. And maybe that's exactly what's happening to you. Maybe the problem isn't the absence of people. Maybe the problem is the absence of real connection. Because when you try to explain what you feel, it seems like no one understands. When you open up, you feel like you have to filter, reduce, simplify, as if your own depth is too much for others. And then, little by little, you learn to stay quiet. You learn to hold it in. You learn to pretend everything is fine. But deep down, it isn't. And that creates a silent cycle. The more you feel, the less you speak. And the less you speak, the more distant you feel. And the more distant you feel, the more you believe something is wrong with you. But what if I told you it isn't? What if this feeling of loneliness isn't a flaw, but a signal? A signal that you're perceiving something most people ignore. A signal that your mind isn't satisfied with superficial connections. A signal that something deeper is happening within you, something not yet fully understood. Now, before we continue, let me ask you something simple, but important. If you've ever felt this way, out of place, disconnected, like you're living on a different level than the people around you, hit the like button on this video. Not for me, but because it helps this message reach others who are also feeling this way, in silence. And I want to hear from you. Comment, I understand, if any part of this resonated with you. Sometimes, all someone needs is to realize they're not alone in this. And if you truly want to understand what's behind this feeling, not just on the surface, but with psychological depth, based on human behavior, archetypes, and everything people rarely explain, subscribe to the channel. Because what you're feeling isn't random. And in the next part, you'll begin to notice something that might completely change how you see your own loneliness, and maybe, for the first time, it will start to make sense. There's a moment, almost imperceptible, when loneliness stops being just a feeling, and starts becoming an identity. And the most dangerous part is that you don't even notice when that shift happens. You just begin to see yourself as someone different, someone who doesn't fit in, someone who will always be on the outside. And the more you repeat that internally, the stronger that narrative becomes. But here's the twist almost no one tells you: it's not the world pushing you away, it's the way you've learned to position yourself within it. And this isn't your fault, it's a pattern. According to Carl Jung, what is not understood within us tends to be projected outward. In other words, when you don't understand your own depth, you start to believe the problem lies in other people, when in reality, there's something within you asking to be seen, integrated, understood. And this is where everything starts to feel confusing. You feel too much, but don't know exactly what. You notice patterns in people, but can't explain them. You pick up on emotions in the environment, but don't understand why it affects you so deeply. And that creates a constant internal noise, a sense of emotional overload that makes you want to pull away, protect yourself, shut down. Yet at the same time, there's a part of you that longs for connection, that wants to be understood, that wants to be truly seen. This internal conflict is what keeps you stuck. Because while one part of you seeks depth, another avoids exposure. While one part wants to open up, another fears not being understood. While one part desires real connection, another has already convinced itself it's impossible. And so, without realizing it, you fall into a pattern of emotional self-isolation. You're present, but not fully. You talk, but don't reveal yourself. You relate, but keep an invisible distance. And the most curious, and perhaps most painful, part is that the people around you have no idea. To them, you're there. Normal. Functional. Maybe even strong. But inside, there's an entire world no one has access to. And do you know what that creates over time? The feeling that no one truly knows you. But how could they, if you've learned to hide? This is the part that changes everything. Because maybe your loneliness doesn't come from a lack of people, but from a lack of authenticity in the connections you allow. Maybe you're not alone because the world excluded you, but because, at some point, you decided that showing who you really are wasn't worth the risk. And that silent decision shapes your entire reality. It filters who gets in. It limits how much you give. It creates an acceptable version of you, while the real one remains isolated. Now, pay attention to this. If your loneliness is connected to how you protect yourself, then what would happen if you started questioning that protection? What if the very thing you believe is protecting you is exactly what's keeping you stuck? Before we continue, comment one word, just one: mask. If this resonated with you, you've already started to see something most people never do. And it's from this awareness that the next layer begins to reveal itself, because there's a much deeper reason behind all of this, something directly connected to your mind, your patterns, and what you haven't yet integrated within yourself. There's a part of your loneliness that has absolutely nothing to do with the outside world, but with something that lives inside you, silent, ignored, and often avoided. And this is where most people choose not to look, because what you'll find isn't comfortable, but it is liberating. Carl Jung called this the shadow. The shadow isn't just the negative side of your personality, as many people think. It's everything you've learned to hide, repress, or deny throughout your life in order to be accepted, loved, or simply to avoid rejection. These are parts of you that were labeled as too much, wrong, intense, strange, and were therefore pushed inward. But the problem is that what is repressed doesn't disappear. It just goes deeper. And the deeper it goes, the more it influences how you perceive the world, other people, and most importantly, yourself. Now think about this: if you've spent years hiding important parts of who you are, how can you expect to feel whole? If you had to build an adapted version of yourself to be accepted, how could anyone connect with your real essence? This is where your loneliness starts to make sense on a deeper level. Because it's not just about a lack of connection with others, it's about a disconnection from yourself. And that disconnection creates a strange feeling, like you're always divided. As if there's an outer you that functions, talks, adapts, and an inner you that observes everything in silence, that feels more, understands more, but rarely gets the space to truly exist. And that's exhausting. It's exhausting because it requires constant energy to maintain a version of yourself that isn't fully authentic. It's exhausting because you start to feel like you're only living halfway. It's exhausting because deep down, there's a growing desire to simply be, without filters, without masks, without fear. But then comes the fear. The fear of not being accepted. The fear of being judged. The fear of losing the few connections you already have. And so you keep holding back. But something even deeper is happening here. According to Jung, what you resist, persists. In other words, the more you avoid looking at these hidden parts, the more they influence your life unconsciously. They start showing up as anxiety, emotional overload, a sense of emptiness, disconnection, exactly like the loneliness you feel. And maybe what you've been calling loneliness is actually a call. A call to look inward. A call to integrate what was rejected. A call to stop running from parts of yourself that are still waiting to be acknowledged. Because as long as you keep ignoring this, no external connection will fill that space. You can be surrounded by people and still feel alone. But when you begin to reconnect with yourself, something changes. Not instantly, not magically, but genuinely. You start noticing patterns. You begin to understand why certain situations affect you so deeply. You start to see that this feeling of being different might not be a flaw, but a trait. A sensitivity. A depth. A perception that, when misunderstood, becomes pain, but when integrated, becomes strength. And this is where the shift begins. Because what you tried so hard to hide might be exactly what makes you unique. What made you feel isolated might be what allows you to see beyond. What made you feel out of place might be what sets you apart from most people. But for that to happen, you need to stop fighting yourself. And start observing yourself more honestly. With more curiosity. With less judgment. Now tell me, how many parts of yourself have you silenced just to be accepted? How many times did you shrink yourself to fit in? How many times did you ignore your own truth just to maintain a superficial connection? If this touched something inside you, maybe it's because you're starting to see something that has always been there, but was never fully understood. And before we continue, if one word could summarize what you just felt right now, what would it be? Comment a word that represents this moment. It could be shadow, truth, awakening, or anything that makes sense to you. Because in the next part, we're going even deeper, into something that explains why, even when you start to understand yourself, it still feels difficult to connect with the world around you. And this is where most people get stuck, because even after you begin to see yourself more clearly, recognize your shadow, understand that there's something deeper within you, in practice, nothing seems to change in your connections. You still feel out of place. Conversations still don't fulfill you. You still sense an invisible distance between you and others. And that creates a new, even more frustrating question: if I'm already understanding myself, why do I still feel alone? The answer lies in something Carl Jung explored deeply: the process of individuation. Individuation isn't about becoming better, it's about becoming whole. And that changes everything. Because when you begin this process, you naturally start moving away from everything that is superficial, automatic, and unconscious. What once seemed normal, shallow conversations, convenience-based relationships, surface-level interactions, starts to lose meaning. Not because you think you're superior, but because you simply can't pretend it satisfies you anymore. And this is where a very specific kind of loneliness emerges. It's no longer the loneliness of rejection, it's the loneliness of awareness. You start noticing patterns in people more clearly. You begin to see inconsistencies, masks, emotional games, unconscious dynamics happening all the time. Things that once went unnoticed, now become obvious. And that's exhausting. Because you see, but often can't speak. You understand, but aren't always understood. You feel, but realize others aren't at the same level of awareness to access it. And so, even surrounded by people, you feel alone on a deeper level. But here's something that might change how you see this. Maybe this phase isn't a problem. Maybe it's a transition. Because when you become more conscious, it's natural to go through a period of misalignment with your environment. It's like you're shifting frequency, while still surrounded by people operating on a different one. And that doesn't mean you need to isolate yourself, but it also means you can't keep forcing yourself to fit where you don't belong. This is the breaking point. Because up until now, you've tried to adapt to belong. Now, life starts pushing you towards something different, being yourself, even if it reduces the number of connections around you. And that's scary. Because deep down, a silent question begins to rise: if I become who I truly am, will I end up alone? And that question paralyzes a lot of people. It makes them go backward. It makes them shrink their awareness to preserve relationships. It makes them go back to wearing masks, just to keep a sense of belonging. But the cost is high. Because every time you abandon yourself, the emptiness grows. Every time you ignore your truth, the internal disconnection deepens. And little by little, you realize you can't go back to who you used to be. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't fit into places that no longer reflect who you're becoming. And that may feel lonely, but it's also powerful. Because for the first time, you begin to understand that your loneliness isn't a sign of failure, but a side effect of your level of awareness. And when you accept that, something shifts. You stop chasing just any connection. You stop forcing yourself to be understood by everyone. You start valuing quality, not quantity. Depth, not surface presence. Truth, not approval. And even if that reduces the number of people around you, it increases the level of real connection when it does happen. But there's still one missing piece in this puzzle. Because understanding this is one thing, living it is something completely different. And this is where the next level comes in, the one that determines whether you'll remain stuck in this cycle of conscious loneliness, or transform it into something that truly strengthens you. And this is where everything stops being just understanding, and starts becoming a choice. Because until now, you've been guided by unconscious patterns, emotional wounds, adaptations you had to make to survive emotionally. But there comes a point, and maybe you're exactly there right now, when you begin to realize that continuing the same cycle is no longer an option. You've seen too much. Felt too much. Understood too much. And that creates a silent responsibility, the responsibility to stop abandoning yourself. Carl Jung said that, who looks outside, dreams, who looks inside, awakens. And awakening isn't comfortable, because it requires you to face truths you once avoided. It requires you to recognize patterns you yourself have fed. It requires you to accept that, in many moments, you were the one who put yourself in places you shouldn't have been, just to avoid feeling alone. But now, something has changed. Because you begin to realize that the loneliness you felt wasn't just the absence of people, it was the absence of yourself. And when that realization hits, everything starts to reorganize. You begin to ask yourself, what truly makes sense to me? Who can I really be myself with? Where am I shrinking just to maintain a connection? And those questions start filtering your reality. You no longer accept just any conversation. You no longer sustain just any relationship. You no longer force yourself to fit into any environment. And at first, this might even intensify the feeling of loneliness, because you're breaking away from what was familiar, even if it wasn't healthy. But at the same time, you begin building something new. Something more aligned. More real. More yours. And this is where many people still make a subtle mistake, one that keeps the cycle going. They wait for someone to come and fill this new space. They expect to find the right person, the right friends, the ideal environment, as if the solution were still outside. But maybe the real move isn't that. Maybe the real move is learning to sustain your own presence. Learning to be with yourself without feeling empty. Learning to listen to your own thoughts without needing to escape. Learning to feel without trying to numb it. Because when you can do that, something changes in how you relate to the world. You stop seeking connection out of lack, and start allowing connection by choice. You stop clinging to anyone who gives you a little attention, and begin to recognize who truly resonates with you. You stop trying to be understood by everyone, and start valuing those who genuinely see you. And that completely changes the kind of relationships you attract. Because now you're not trying to fill a void, you're sharing a presence. And that has a quiet, but deep impact. People start to feel it. Even without you saying a word. They notice something different about you. A calmness. A depth. An authenticity that isn't common. And gradually, more genuine connections begin to appear, not in quantity, but in quality. But there's an important detail here. This doesn't happen instantly. There's an in-between. A space between who you were, and who you're becoming. And that space can feel uncomfortable. It can feel empty. It can feel lonely. But in reality, it's in that space that transformation happens. It's where you stop depending on external validation. It's where you rebuild your identity from the inside out. It's where you learn to sustain yourself emotionally. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real reason you felt alone for so long. Not because you were meant to live in isolation. But because you were being prepared to find yourself. Now tell me, can you feel the difference between being alone and being disconnected from yourself? Because when you begin to see that, loneliness stops being a burden and starts becoming a space. A space where you rebuild yourself. Where you understand yourself. Where you finally begin to become who you've always been, without needing to hide. If one word could represent this moment for you, what would it be? Maybe awareness. Maybe awakening. Maybe truth. Or maybe something only you can feel right now. Comment that word. Because in the next step, you're going to realize something even deeper about all of this, something that might completely change how you relate to your own mind, and the world around you. If you made it this far, it wasn't by accident. At some point in this video, something touched you. Maybe a sentence, maybe a feeling you can't quite explain, but you felt it. And when that happens, it means you're no longer at the same level of awareness you were before. So let me tell you something directly, this channel is for you. If you want to keep exploring this kind of content, deep, psychological, grounded in human behavior, self-awareness, and the ideas of Carl Jung, then subscribe now. Because the next videos will take you even deeper into the process you've started today. And if this message helped you in any way, comment below. It can be simple. It helped, or even just one word that represents what you felt while watching. That not only strengthens this community, but also shows others that they're not alone on this path. And of course, leave a like. It may seem small, but it helps this kind of content reach more people who are going through exactly what you're going through right now, in silence. And if you felt like this video opened something inside you, don't stop here. There's another video on the channel that will go even deeper into all of this, and it might answer the exact next question that just started forming in your mind. So click and keep going, because what you started today is only the beginning. Thank you for staying until the end. I'll see you in the next video.